All right, welcome to the April 2022 version. Wow, not enough coffee yet of the Agones community meeting. And I think Robbie, you have lots of fun stuff on the agenda for us.
Yes, I put your name on some of them, so I'm gonna to
Oh, that's not
ask you lots
allowed.
of questions. So the first one was Tejo was asking before we started recording if we record the meetings, and I assured him that we did. But then
Yeah.
I was scrolling back through the meeting notes and couldn't find links in a bunch of the recent meetings. And Steve found the YouTube channel that it looks like we upload stuff to. So I think we have been recording meetings, but we just haven't necessarily been putting all of the links into the doc because it looks like looking at the YouTube channel, like I see one, or I guess these are old. I see the last recording I see is October 2021. So maybe we haven't recorded the most recent ones.
Well, we didn't have one in November. We didn't have one in.
So like January 27th and February 24th may
Yeah.
not have been recorded.
I'll
But
check. I don't have anything sitting in my email, but I'll double check and find it. But yeah, we did skip a few with like we didn't last month because of GDC and other fun stuff. So that's why there some of the gaps are intentional. But yeah, I'll double check.
awesome. And we will try to keep recording these going forward.
Oh,
Okay, so
absolutely.
I added I screwed that up. Added a note there to remind you. Okay, so the next couple of things were sort of just reminders, announcements. I just finished the last set of PRs to update us to support Kubernetes 1.22 for the next release. It's been a while. I think when I looked, it was like last October, the last time we updated Kubernetes version. So this is maybe a bit overdue, but we are keeping up with the releases as best we can, and now we're up to 1.22. And after we cut this release, I'll check and see if it's already time to update to 1.23. So we're going to definitely try to keep up with Kubernetes releases and make sure we don't. At one point in the past, we started falling far enough behind that people were getting concerned that we wouldn't have an Agones release that like supported. I think it was either GKE or Azure versions before they started dropping the ability to create those versions. So I just wanted to give people a heads up. The next release will have a new Kubernetes version for implications for upgrades and so forth. And that also kind of segues into the next thing, which is the next release is coming really soon. Next Tuesday in particular is the release candidate. So if there's anything you are hoping to get into the next release, please get those PRs out and maybe ping me in Slack if you need a quick review so we can make sure stuff gets merged. And then we'll go into our week-long feature freeze before cutting the release. The one thing I did want to highlight, so there's been a PR out for quite a while to add support for ARM, or at least initial support for ARM in terms of building some stuff, and we expect that to be in before the release candidate. So if this is something that you're interested in, testing out or using, this release candidate will be an awesome one for you to try and take a build and see if it works, because that's going to be pretty early. It's probably we're not going to probably call it completely supported yet, and I think that the author of that PR said that there were a couple more follow-ups after this one for us to be finished supporting ARM. But I want to give people a heads up that this is coming. And if you're interested, to please try it out, either with the release candidate or with the next release. Let's see. And then the next thing I put on here was, it's been a while since we've checked in on feature promotions. And coincidentally, somebody just pinged in Slack yesterday asking about the status of features, and if there was any sort of timeline or ETA for things graduating. So I called out a couple of here that I thought might be ready to graduate. So we have Node External DNS, which is currently in beta. It's been in beta for a little while now. We have the custom fleet autoscaler resync period and graceful termination, which have both been in alpha for quite a while. So I think that the Node External DNS has been in beta since 1.19. We're about to cut 1.23. The custom resync period has been in alpha since 1.17, and the graceful termination has been in alpha since 1.18. So for all those, there's been quite a bit of bake time. And for the alpha ones to graduate to beta, what we'd like is for someone to actually kind of be using them and say that it works and is ready to be turned on by default for everyone. For the beta ones to graduate to GA, like similarly, it would be great if somebody was using it and saying that it worked properly. In this case, it's already on by default, and so we have pretty good confidence that it's not going to break things. if we move it to GA, because all that does is prevent you from turning it off. But if anybody is currently turning it off, we definitely want to hear about that, because this would, moving it to GA would prevent people from being able to turn it off. So if there's anything that definitely doesn't work about Node external DNS, that would be a great thing to highlight and call out. Realistically, none of these are going to get promoted before the release next week, right? Because there's not very many days left. But I think these would all be sort of on the radar for maybe being promoted for the following release 6 weeks later. And so unless there are any objections, I think I'm going to create tickets to bump all of these up, mark them as help wanted in case anybody wants to jump on those, and also try to see if we can find people that are actually using them, to comment on whether or not they're working for them, right? So in particular, like graceful termination was contributed by someone who said they needed it. So, presumably that person has flipped this feature flag and is actually using it, and maybe it's happy in that state. But we could bump it up to beta, and they wouldn't have to flip the feature flag anymore, right? Same thing with the other two. These were all sort of community feature suggestions, and I think in most cases PRs from the community to add these things. And so we hopefully can circle back with those people and get some confidence that they're working correctly. So that was all on feature updates. The question in Slack was about player tracking, and said that player tracking has been in alpha for quite a long time. I think they mentioned it's been almost 2 years now, which is getting kind of long on the tooth. And when I look, it says alpha since 1.6, right? And we're about to cut 1.23. I think that part of the reason for that is that the other parts of the player tracking features are under different feature flags and didn't come out to 1.14. So they haven't been in alpha for quite as long. And the other part is that after the player tracking APIs got in place, there was a bit of feedback saying, oh, why don't you write those APIs in a slightly different style? And Mark and nobody else has had a chance to kind of go back and rework those. And so I don't have a great ETA for when player tracking might move to beta. That's a much larger feature to move forward. Like all of the ones that I called out here are pretty small things that are very low risk, and we have high confidence that they work correctly. Whereas player tracking, we both want to rewrite the APIs, make sure they still work, and then talk about moving it to beta. So if anybody is depending upon the player tracking APIs, is using those, like either is really in favor of changing the APIs or really doesn't want to change the APIs, I think that would also be great feedback, because maybe the comments about changing the APIs are 2 years old and we don't care as much anymore, and we'd rather take what we have that's working and push it forward. So I think Mark will be back for the next community meeting next month, and we can definitely put player tracking status and potential feature promotion on the agenda for picking his brain to see where, because he might have some other information that I don't have about that as well. Cool. All right, Stephen, you had an idea about passing parameters to game servers during allocation.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but I was just thinking. So one of the things we currently do is have different game modes, and so we have a fleet for each game mode. But I was thinking, why don't we just have fleet of just a pool of game servers, and then when we allocate them, we then to switch it to a certain game mode. But I was kind of wondering about if there's anything already available for that, or is that something we're actually on? The thing is, it might mess with the life cycle, because then you've got kind of ready and allocated, and it's like, well, what if it takes some time to allocate while it's activating that game mode? So.
Yeah, so there is something you can pass in the allocation request that sets extra metadata fields on the game server resource. And the intent of that feature is to do kind of what you're describing. So you could say, I want to allocate, and the game server is allocated, you should tell it I want map Q. And then if the game server process is watching the game server resource, it'll get a callback that says labels have changed. It'll get a callback because you've been allocated, but it'll also get a callback that says labels have changed. Now it says map Q, which will allow the game server to kind of switch into that mode. You have a great point though about timing and delays, because I think it's it kind of assumes that, that the allocation is sort of instantaneous, right? You switch from ready to allocated, and we immediately return that information back to where it can be given to the client to connect right away. And if it takes a while for a game server to switch from I'm ready to be put into one of 3 different modes, but when you tell me which mode to go into, it takes a little bit of time to get there. There's not really a great way to represent that right now. So I think the one way you could do that is you could have like your matchmaker system in the middle, ask for something to be allocated with a specific map, get the information back about which game server has been allocated, so the game server ID and the port and so forth. It would move to the allocated state, which will prevent the system from deleting the game server, which is great, like during auto scaling or upgrades. But it could then go back and watch the game server resource for the game server to update another label saying it's actually ready for people, right? So the game server could be watching saying, great, I've been allocated, I get this map, load up the map, and then call set labels or set annotations to put information back into the game server resource that it's ready for players. And then the matchmaker could basically hold that connection for some amount of time and then return it back to the clients, right? So it does sort of delay allocations because the matchmaker would need to kind of wait during that time, because there's nothing sort of inherent in the system right now that represents that intermediate state of I've asked for somebody, but there's a delay between allocation and actually being ready to serve people. There also might, and I haven't checked, but there might be something in the player APIs that would facilitate that as well. Like you might be able to like set player capacity to 0, but allocate, and then have the game server make a call to increase player capacity, which might sort of effectively do the same thing as if you were using custom labels to do it. Although
that's
that might
quite interesting.
require like a reallocation call to then go back and find the one once the player capacity increased. So I don't know. You might take a look at that. But I know that like the custom labels thing would work. But what would change, like from the architecture point of view, is instead of ask for an allocation, get it right away, allow the client to connect, you'd have to ask for an allocation, wait some amount of time, and then allow the client to connect. So that latency might not be a huge deal to clients if they say like, connect me to a match and it, spends for 25 seconds instead of 20 seconds because you have to find other people anyway, then maybe it's not a big change from the game player perspective.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that could work.
So I don't know, you might experiment with those and see how they work. You could also file a ticket and say like, hey, like, is this worth adding a new state, right? So I think, right now we have our state diagram with the different states, and the reason we have the ready state is exactly for this problem, but during startup. And so we could say, is it worth making a formal state that is like this, like sort of transition between ready and allocated, but not ready for client connections? I think if you look at the documentation we have right now, it says like, we'd like to not add any more states. You can use labels, right? Which is sort of what I described. But if it's a common enough use case, then we can turn that like label-based flow into a proper state that's supported. So, and either way, we can also add documentation to describe how that would work too, right? We have like the section on integration patterns, and we can add a section to the website for how to do these sorts of things too.
Yeah, that's great. I guess there could be a risk, even what I'm suggesting, that if requests for 2 different game modes come in soon together, then we might not have the capacity, because I'm thinking, just make a big pool. But I guess you could, if you had a lot of game modes, you could make enough, a large enough shared pool to kind of have
right. Yeah. So then you also have to make sure your binary can adapt to any of them, or you can also, I mean, it would still be creating multiple fleets, but you could use labels on the game servers and on the allocation requests to say like, I know that like this binary supports these 3 different types, and so I can put those labels and allocate and say, give me something of type A. This game server is labeled with types A, B, and C, so it can support any of those. So I'll pick from that pool, right? So you can kind of mix and match also to sort of tune like your pools and your buffer sizes versus your sort of expected usage.
Great, thanks a lot.
Cool. All right. So the last thing we have currently on the agenda is I also put your name on April, which is meeting time. I was scrolling through old meeting notes, and there were a couple things I wanted to follow up on with Mark, but he's not here. So I picked one to follow up on with you since you are here, which is you'd mentioned in the past that we might want to try to find a different meeting time. I don't know if we've discussed that or proposed any alternate times, but it might be worth looking to try to find a time that will increase attendance. Did you have any thoughts or status updates on that?
Yeah, we were going to do a quick survey for the community in general. So I was working with our survey team, and we just had another fun Google reorg. So when we can get all that back in place, we'll run it again.
Okay, cool. So I'll just make a note that the survey will come at some point in the future, which may change our meeting time. I know in the past we've definitely had people on Slack say like, I'm in Australia. This meeting's in the middle of the night for me.
Mhm.
I'll set an alarm because I really want to come to this next one, but it's definitely not a time that they could attend regularly, right? So I know we're kind of stretching like early morning Pacific and late in the day for Stephen right now, and kind of balancing those two. And the other thing I've seen done in the past also is having, and this can be difficult for people to remember, but you can have the time like change. Like this month we
Yep.
have one that's EMEA friendly. This month we have one that's APAC friendly, etc. So
Yeah, we talked about that too.
cool, awesome. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to the agenda before we wrap it up? Going once, going twice. Okay, I think that will do it for today. When is our next meeting scheduled? Is it like end of May at some point?
Yeah, it's supposed to
May
be the
20th.
last Thursday. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, by then we will have another release. We might have ARM stuff more finished than it is today. We might be upgrading to another version of Kubernetes. So lots of exciting stuff coming in the future. And then hopefully some of the features will also make some forward progress between 123 and 124.
Just a question about the Kubernetes. Do you anticipate the Kubernetes upgrade will be in 123, or is that not? I mean, I'm not asking for this, just wondering.
Oh yeah, no. So the Kubernetes 122 I finished. So that is
Oh, okay.
done for 1.23. So what I'm saying is we might have another one for 124.
Oh,
So
okay.
we might check and say like, oh gosh, like we waited I think 5 or 6 months to do this one, which might mean that another one is ready to do right away. At one point, the cadence was kind of lined up where basically like every other release we were upgrading Kubernetes, and it's been quite a few now without us upgrading. So Kubernetes has also slowed down their release cadence a little bit. They went from doing 4 releases per year to 3 releases per year. When it was 4 releases per year, it was basically one every 3 months, and we cut every 6 weeks. So it lined up like almost perfectly calendar wise that we were going twice as fast as them. So that makes sense that we did every other one. Now they're down to one every 4 months instead of every 3 months. And so like the timing is not quite as consistent. And then also for our upgrades, so what we always check for, and if you look back in the last meeting notes, is to making sure the cloud providers support them. And so even if Kubernetes cuts a new release, it often takes a little while before it's available on enough of the cloud providers that we feel confident upgrading. Cool. All right. Anything else? Okay. Everybody can get the other half an hour back from this meeting. Go home early from work, Stephen. Get some dinner. April can get some more coffee. Cool. All right. Well, I'll see you guys all again next month. Thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.